You most likely picture the Sahara as an endless, boring sandbox. Yellow dunes, scorching sun, maybe a couple of tired camels. And that's it. Emptiness. But what if I told you that this is the greatest lie in all of geography? Under millions of tons of scorching sand lies not just rock. There are traces of enormous rivers, ruins of unknown empires, and even the bones of monsters that ruled the world long before the dinosaurs. The Sahara is not a wasteland. It is a gigantic safe, and we have only just begun to find the key. The size of this desert is so vast that if you placed it over a map, it would cover almost the entire territory of the United States. 9 million square kilometers of mystery. And the most terrifying thing is that this sand works like time itself. It knows how to hide the evidence. For centuries, people vanished without a trace, trying to find a legendary city of gold or an oasis of eternal life. But the reality we uncovered in the 21st century turned out to be far more extraordinary than any legend. Today we descend deep beneath the earth to see what the sands have hidden for the last 5,000 years. From ancient launch pads to oceans that boiled away in a single second. Buckle up, because what we found first is visible even from space. In 1965, the astronauts of the Gemini mission flew over Africa, tasked with photographing the Earth's surface and searching for geological anomalies. When they looked through the porthole over Mauritania, their breath caught. Right in the middle of a lifeless flat plateau, a gigantic eye stared back at them. This is not a metaphor. Perfectly even concentric circles, one inside another, formed a structure resembling a dartboard, except 40 kilometers in diameter. Neither from an aircraft nor from the ground could anyone grasp this scale. For centuries, people walked across these rings assuming they were strange mountains. But from space it was clear, this was something far too precise to be an accident. As soon as the images reached the press, conspiracy theorists erupted. We found it. Atlantis. The most unsettling thing is how plausible it sounds. Open the dialogues of Plato, and the hairs on your arms begin to rise. He wrote that the capital of the Atlanteans was surrounded by 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land. Look at the satellite images of the reshot structure. There they are. He said mountains lay to the north and a great plain to the south. Match. Even the dimensions he gave in ancient units, when converted to kilometers, align almost perfectly with the diameter of this eye. The internet exploded with theories. Some said it was a crater from an ancient nuclear blast. Others called it a landing pad for alien spacecraft turned to stone. It seemed history was about to be overturned. But geologists who arrived with hammers and instruments quickly cooled the dreamers down. The eye of the Sahara is a geological dome. Millions of years ago, a gigantic bubble of magma began rising from the Earth's depths, buckling the layers of rock like an enormous abscess. The volcano never erupted. The magma solidified underground and erosion took over. For hundreds of millions of years, it shaved the dome layer by layer. Different rock types erode at different rates. Hard layers remained as ridges. Soft ones wore into depressions. That is how the perfect rings formed. Not a city built by gods. A cross-section of the Earth's crust. An open book of geology. But even knowing the truth, standing at the center of this structure is unsettling. Nature is the most extraordinary architect that has ever existed. If the eye was merely stone, the next discovery made scientists question whether they stood in a desert or on the floor of a sea. About 150 kilometers from Cairo lies Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of the Whales. Imagine walking across scorching sand, nothing around you but dunes, burned-out cliffs, and wind howling like someone in grief. You stumble over a smooth stone jutting from the earth, start digging, and realize you are looking at a spine. a gigantic spine the size of a log. You dig further, and the sand reveals a skull with an enormous fanged jaw. Not a dinosaur, a whale, and it is not alone. Climb a dune and look down. The entire valley is scattered with skeletons. Hundreds of enormous creatures in the middle of one of the driest deserts on Earth. It looks like a surrealist painting by Salvador Dali. Sea monsters drifting through golden sand. When European explorers found these bones in the 19th century, they were dumbstruck. Local Bedouins had avoided this place for centuries, calling it cursed. Remains of jinn turned to stone by the gods. Religious zealots declared it proof of the Great Flood. The ocean surged across Africa, whales swam into the desert, and when the water receded, they could not get back. Satisfying. Until scientists cleaned the bones and noticed something extraordinary. These whales had legs. What lay in the Valley of the Whales were basilosauruses, ancient predators that ruled the seas 40 million years ago, not gentle plankton grazers. The basilosaurus was a killing machine 18 meters long, the height of a 6-story building, with a serpentine body and jaws that crushed bone. Their fossilized stomachs held the remains of sharks and enormous turtles. They were apex predators, but most remarkable were their hind limbs, small yet fully formed legs with toes, knees, and ankles. Too weak to walk on land, but an unmistakable echo of an earlier life. This discovery proved that whales were once land animals, something like wolves or hyenas, that one day chose to return to the water. How did they end up in the sand? Plate tectonics. 40 million years ago, North Africa as we know it did not exist. In its place stretched the ancient Tethys Ocean, a warm, shallow tropical paradise, thick with mangrove forests. Basilosauruses came to breed or die, as modern whales visit warm bays today. Then Africa drifted north and collided with Europe. The ocean floor rose, the water retreated, swamps dried, and desert took hold. The sand preserved that history better than any museum. Walking through Wadi al-Hitan today, you walk across the ocean floor. Under your boots crunch fossilized shells, corals, and mangrove roots millions of years old. Where you bake in the sun today, tomorrow an ocean may surge. Now let us go to the heart of the desert, Algeria's Tassili Niger Plateau, known as the Stone Forest. A labyrinth of cliffs, canyons, and sandstone sculpted into towers and arches so bizarre it looks like Mars. In 1933, French Army Lieutenant Brennans, patrolling on camelback, stepped into a ravine to shelter from the midday sun and froze. The canyon walls were covered in thousands, tens of thousands of drawings. Not primitive scrawlings, but enormous, colorful, detailed frescoes telling the story of a completely different world. Dark-skinned athletic people herded huge spotted cattle. Hunters chased giraffes and antelopes, elephants, rhinoceroses, ostriches, hippos, animals that need deep fresh water. Rendered with such precision, the artist clearly saw them every day. And most shockingly, enormous reed boats full of people, sailing where today there is no moisture for hundreds of kilometers. When Henri Lot's expedition arrived in the 1950s, they found something even stranger among the hunting scenes, figures that looked nothing like humans. Lode called them the round heads, gigantic depictions up to 6 meters tall of beings in strange suits resembling spacesuits, with round, featureless heads and sometimes antennae, hovering above tiny human figures who stretched their arms upward. One fresco, the great god of Sahara, looks so disturbing and modern that ancient contact theorists still use it as prime evidence. Ancient astronauts, they say, visitors who brought knowledge and left when the climate failed. The truth discovered by climatologists was far more dramatic. Scientists drilled dried lake beds and analyzed ancient pollen. The verdict? the Sahara is not an eternal desert. It is a climatic pendulum. The Earth wobbles as it rotates, a process called precession. Roughly every 20,000 years, the tilt of the axis shifts, moving the belt of tropical rains northward. The last green period was between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago. The Sahara was paradise, a boundless savanna like modern Tanzania, with rivers kilometers wide feeding a vast water network. At the center of today's desert lay Lake Megachad, larger than the Caspian Sea. People lived there in abundance, with no need to fight for resources. They painted, danced, and sailed on boats with no idea their time was ending. Around 5,000 years ago, the pendulum swung back. In perhaps a few hundred years, rains stopped, rivers shrank to dust, grass crumbled, lakes became salt. The late paintings at Tassili are heavy with grief. Animals vanish, weapons appear, people begin killing each other for the last puddles. Survivors fled east to the only river that held, the Nile. Historians believe this wave of climate refugees from the dying Sahara ignited Egyptian civilization. Pyramids, sphinxes, pharaohs, perhaps humanity's attempt to preserve the memory of a paradise left in the sand. And the cycle is not finished. Models predict that in roughly 15,000 years the axis will shift again, the rains will return, and the Sahara will bloom. But while some fled, others stayed and challenged the desert. In 2011, satellite images over southern Libya revealed shapes buried in the sand. Squares, straight lines, the outlines of foundations. More than 100 fortified settlements, castles, and cities no one knew existed. The empire of the Garamantes, called savage barbarians by Rome, yet builders of a technological miracle. They had writing, metallurgy, a chariot army, two-story houses, and paved streets, all while much of Europe sat in darkness. But one question tormented archaeologists. Where did they get water? No rivers, no rain, the nearest body of water thousands of kilometers away. The answer was underground. The Garamantes created fogaras, thousands of kilometers of tunnels carved by hand through solid rock, in total darkness and suffocating heat, under constant risk of collapse. They reached aquifer layers beneath the hills and let water flow by gravity into the valley, an engineering network comparable to a modern city metro. They grew wheat, grapes, figs, and dates where today not even camel thorn survives. But this technology became their curse. The water was fossil water accumulated over millennia. As the empire grew, the table fell. The tunnels had to be dug ever deeper, and eventually the system became too complex to sustain. When the water was gone, the cities emptied, the sand returned, and all that remained were ghost outlines visible from space. If the Garamantes perished slowly, the next Saharan mystery points to a catastrophe that struck in an instant. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, one object puzzled jewelers above all: the pharaoh's pectoral pendant with a sacred scarab at its center. Carter thought it was chalcedony, a rare quartz. Decades later, mineralogists ran a chemical analysis and gasped. It was glass. Pure, transparent, lemon-yellow Libyan desert glass. The mystery was not its beauty, but its origin. To transform ordinary Saharan sand into glass that pure, you must heat it to nearly 2,000 degrees Celsius in a fraction of a second. No fire, no volcano, no campfire achieves that. Lava is nearly half that temperature. Theories of ancient nuclear war erupted immediately. Scientists searched for a crater across every square meter of the Libyan desert. Nothing. Then physicists modeled a celestial impact on supercomputers, and what they saw was frightening. 29 million years ago, an asteroid entered Earth's atmosphere over the Sahara and exploded in the sky just kilometers above the surface. An airburst so powerful, the Hiroshima bomb would have been a firecracker. A second sun ignited. The thermal wave struck the desert like a hammer, melting the surface of the sand across hundreds of kilometers without ever touching the ground. Dunes became rivers of liquid glass. When everything cooled and cracked, the desert was covered in precious fragments that the Pharaoh's people gathered up, believing them to be rays of raw frozen in solid form. In a sense, they were not wrong. The Sahara looks like a place of death. Dead whales, dead empires, melted sand. But beneath it all hides a resource worth more than gold. In the mid-20th century, geologists drilling Libya for oil broke through the desert floor. And instead of black gold, a fountain of crystal-clear cold fresh water burst from the borehole. Under the lifeless sands, hundreds of meters down, lies the Nubian Aquifer. Not a river or a lake, but a genuine underground ocean. 2.5 million cubic kilometers of fresh water, enough to flood Germany, France, and Spain combined. Rain seeped drop by drop through the sand for millions of years and became locked in stone chambers deep underground. This is water that dinosaurs drank, water that remembers the world young. Gaddafi called it the eighth wonder of the world and built the great man-made river, pipes wide enough for a truck to drive through, stretching thousands of kilometers, pulling ancient water to coastal cities and turning sand into garden. It gave life to millions. But the Nubian Aquifer is non-renewable. The rains that filled it are long gone. We began this journey thinking the desert was empty. Now we know that is the greatest illusion of all. The Sahara is a layered cake of time. Peel back the top layer and find lost cities with technologies we cannot replicate. Dig deeper and see green meadows with giraffes and people who do not yet know their paradise is about to burn. Deeper still, an ocean floor scattered with the bones of whales that had legs. Drill into the darkness and find water waiting millions of years. The Sahara teaches one essential lesson. Stability is a myth. Climate, geography, life itself, all of it is temporary. What seems like an eternal desert today may be an ocean floor tomorrow. Our thriving megacities in 10,000 years may lie buried under dunes, leaving only glass fragments and scraps of plastic for our descendants to puzzle over. The planet constantly changes its scenery, and we are merely the audience at this magnificent performance, trying to piece together the plot from the clues left behind. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Subscribe if you want to know what else our planet is hiding. Until next time.